The mysterious encounter. Sarah had always lived a simple life. Every day, she worked hard at her 2 jobs, but no matter how much effort she put in, she never seemed to get ahead. She was tired, worn out, and always thinking about how to make ends meet. Her bank account was empty, and there were bills piling up at home. It felt like no matter what she did, she just couldn't catch a break. It was a chilly evening when everything changed. After finishing her late shift at the diner, Sarah started walking home, the cold wind biting at her skin. Her thoughts were a blur as she walked down the dark street, her tired eyes focused on the ground. She didn't expect anything out of the ordinary to happen, but tonight, something felt different. As she walked past the alleyway near her apartment building, she heard a strange sound. It was almost like a soft hum, like an engine idling, but there was no car in sight. She stopped in her tracks, looking around. Her breath caught in her throat as a flash of light appeared in the alley. It was bright, but not harsh, almost like it had a warm glow to it. At first, she thought her mind was playing tricks on her, maybe from exhaustion or lack of sleep, but the light was real. Curiosity mixed with caution, Sarah took a few steps toward the source of the glow. As she peered into the alley, she saw a figure standing near a strange, glowing object. It wasn't a human. It wasn't anything she had ever seen before. The figure was tall, with smooth skin that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. Its shape was like nothing Sarah had ever imagined. Its body was humanoid, but its features were alien, unfamiliar, and yet, somehow, calm. The figure stood still, not moving, and yet Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that it was aware of her presence. The air seemed to vibrate with an unspoken connection, as if this alien being was waiting for something or someone. Sarah felt her heart race in her chest. She had no idea what was going on, but something inside her told her this wasn't an ordinary night. This wasn't an ordinary encounter. Frozen in place, Sarah could barely move. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. She felt a wave of fear, but also a strange sense of wonder. Her mind struggled to make sense of what she was seeing. The alien's face was unreadable, but there was something in its eyes, something deep, something intelligent. She couldn't explain it, but it felt like this being wasn't just some random visitor from another planet. It felt like it was here for a purpose. For what felt like an eternity, the two stood in silence, staring at each other. Sarah's pulse thudded in her ears as she tried to figure out what to do. Was this a dream? Was she losing her mind? No, this was real. The alien's strange presence was too vivid, too real for her to doubt. Finally, as if sensing her hesitation, the figure took a small step forward. "Hello," the alien's voice suddenly echoed in her mind. It wasn't a sound that came from its mouth, but a clear, calm voice inside her head. The voice was soft but commanding, as if it was both speaking to her and understanding her every thought. Sarah stumbled backward, her eyes wide with shock. What are you?" she whispered, her voice shaky. The alien tilted its head slightly, as though considering the question. Then, without warning, it spoke again, but this time it wasn't a direct answer. "I need help," the voice said. "Help that only you can provide." The words echoed in Sarah's mind, and she felt a chill run down her spine. Help? What did it need? How could she help an alien? She had no idea what this being wanted or why it had come to her, but there was something about its voice, its presence, that made her believe it wasn't here to harm her. "I don't know what you're talking about," Sarah replied, her voice barely a whisper. I'm just an ordinary person. I don't know anything about aliens." The alien stepped closer, its glowing eyes never leaving hers. "You have something I need," it said, its voice gentle but certain. "And in return, I will give you something you desire, something you cannot achieve on your own." Sarah's confusion grew. She was exhausted, broke, and struggling to survive, but she had nothing of value to offer to an alien. What could she possibly have that was worth anything to this otherworldly being? For a moment, They just stood there, the silence thick with unspoken questions. The strange, glowing object beside the alien hummed louder now, vibrating with an energy that made the ground beneath Sarah's feet feel as if it was pulsing. She didn't understand what was happening, but one thing was certain. Her life was about to change in a way she could never have predicted. The alien waited patiently, as though giving her time to process, to understand. It didn't speak again, but Sarah could feel its eyes on her, waiting for her decision. It was almost as if this was a turning point, a choice she had to make, though she had no idea what the consequences would be. What could this alien want? And what could it possibly offer her in return? For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt a flicker of hope rise inside her. Maybe, just maybe, this mysterious encounter could lead to something more than just survival. But then again, it could also lead to something far more dangerous than she could imagine. Whatever this was, it was just the beginning. And Sarah knew she had to make a choice. The unexpected offer. The following day, Sarah couldn't shake the strange encounter from her mind. She tried to push it aside, chalking it up to exhaustion or her overactive imagination. But deep down, something tugged at her. She knew it wasn't just a dream. It felt too real. The way the alien's voice had echoed in her mind, how its eyes had looked into hers, she couldn't forget it. It was as if the encounter had left an imprint on her soul. She went about her usual routine, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the mysterious figure in the alley. It had only been one night, but it felt like an eternity since she'd stood face to face with something so extraordinary. She tried to convince herself it didn't matter, that she had bigger concerns, like paying the rent, buying groceries, keeping her head above water. But despite everything, she couldn't ignore the pull of that strange, glowing presence. That afternoon, Sarah was walking back from the store, a bag of cheap groceries in hand, when she saw him again. Zarn, the alien. He was standing at the edge of the alley, just like the night before, his glowing form almost hidden in the shadows. He didn't move when she spotted him, but she knew it was him. There was no mistaking it. For a moment, Sarah froze. Her heart skipped a beat, and her breath caught in her throat. Should she run? Was this some sort of trap? But then she remembered his calm demeanor, the way he hadn't shown any aggression. The alien hadn't harmed her before, and something about him told her that he wouldn't now. With a deep breath, Sarah walked cautiously toward him. The chill of the evening air seemed to wrap around her, but there was something else too, an electric charge in the atmosphere. As she neared, she saw the familiar shimmer of his skin and the steady, peaceful glow that emanated from him. This time, he didn't speak immediately. Instead, he simply looked at her, as if waiting for her to gather her thoughts. The silence between them stretched on, and Sarah felt a strange pressure building in her chest. She had so many questions. Why was he here? What did he want? And perhaps most importantly, what did she have to do with any of this? Then, as if sensing her thoughts, Zarn spoke. His voice wasn't a sound that came from his mouth. It was a direct communication in her mind, clear and soft, yet powerful enough to make her feel it in every part of her being. "I need your help, Sarah," he said. "There is something I cannot do alone. And you, with your unique skills, can assist me." Sarah blinked, taken aback. "My skills? I'm just a waitress. What could I possibly do for you?" Zarn didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer, his eyes glowing brighter in the dim light. She could feel the intensity of his gaze, and though she was still nervous, there was a strange calm in his presence, as though he knew something she didn't. "You are more than you realize," Zarn said. "I have traveled far and encountered many, but there is something about you, something I cannot explain. I need your assistance, Sarah. There is a mission, one that, if completed, will change everything for both of us." Sarah took a step back, still processing what he was saying. "What kind of mission?" she asked. "What's in it for me?" Zarn's eyes softened, and his voice came again, this time with a hint of promise. "In return for your help, I will give you what you desire most." something beyond what you think is possible. I can offer you something you can't even imagine. Power, freedom, wealth. It is all within your reach. But only if you choose to help me." Sarah's heart raced as his words sank in. Wealth, freedom, power. Those were things she had always dreamed of, things she had never thought would be possible. But was it too good to be true? Could she trust him? "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts in her head. Zarn's gaze intensified, and Sarah felt a cold shiver run down her spine. "I am searching for something very specific, something ancient. It is a key, an object of great importance. Without it, I cannot complete my mission. But with your help, we can find it together." For a moment, Sarah stood there, caught between disbelief and the strange, magnetic pull of the offer. She had no idea what kind of object Zarn was talking about, nor did she understand the full scope of the mission he spoke of. But the more she listened, the more she felt that this wasn't just some random encounter. This was a turning point. The promise of something beyond her wildest dreams was too tempting to ignore. She thought about her struggles, the endless days of barely getting by, the bills piling up, the constant feeling of being stuck. What if this was her chance to change everything? Sarah hesitated for just a moment longer, weighing the risks. But deep inside, a part of her, the part that had always dreamed of more, knew that this was an opportunity she couldn't pass up. "I'll help you," she said, her voice firm. "But I need to know more. What exactly are we looking for?" Zarn's expression remained unreadable, but there was a glimmer of approval in his eyes. "All in good time, Sarah. But first, we must work together. Are you ready?" As Sarah nodded, a sense of excitement and fear swirled in her chest. This was it. Her life was about to take a turn into the unknown, and there was no going back now. The risky decision. Sarah barely slept that night. The weight of the alien's offer pressed on her chest, like an invisible force, keeping her wide awake. She couldn't shake the thoughts swirling in her mind. What if this was all a trick? What if she was walking into something dangerous, something she couldn't escape from? But then again, what if it wasn't a trick? What if Zarn's promise was real? She'd never had a chance like this before. She had always played it safe, never made big moves, never took big risks. It was easier that way, safer. But everything in her life had been small and safe, and it hadn't gotten her anywhere. She was stuck. She felt like a character in someone else's story, unable to take the lead. Now she was being offered something incredible, something that could change everything. The thought of wealth, power, and freedom danced in her mind. But it wasn't just that. It was the promise of change. The chance to do something that mattered, to be part of something bigger than herself. Something beyond her tired days in the diner, beyond the bills she couldn't pay, beyond the small apartment that felt like a cage. As the morning light filtered through her window, Sarah knew she had a decision to make. She couldn't sit on the fence any longer. Either she would accept Zarn's offer and step into the unknown, or she would walk away and live with the consequences of never knowing what could have been. At breakfast, her fingers trembled as she pushed her half-eaten toast around on her plate. Her mind kept drifting back to the alien. She could still hear his voice in her head, soft and powerful, offering her everything she had ever dreamed of. But what would she have to do to earn it? And was it worth the risk? Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her landlord. "Rent is due tomorrow. You still haven't paid. No more extensions." Sarah's stomach turned. She didn't know how much longer she could keep pretending everything was fine. She had to make a decision, and it had to be now. As she stood up from the table, Sarah's gaze fell on the small stack of bills on the counter, reminders of how stuck she was, how powerless she had felt for so long. Then she thought of Zarn's offer. What if this was her way out? What if this was the opportunity she had been waiting for her entire life? It was in that moment that Sarah made up her mind. She had never been one to take risks. But what was the alternative? To keep struggling, to keep fighting a battle she might never win. No, she had to take the chance. Grabbing her jacket, she left the apartment and headed straight for the alley where she had met Zarn. Her heart pounded in her chest with every step, but there was also something else. Excitement. For the first time in years, she felt like she was doing something that mattered. When she reached the alley, Zarn was waiting. He stood there, exactly where he had been the night before, his glowing presence almost calming despite the unknowns that surrounded him. "Are you ready?" Zarn's voice echoed in her mind before he even spoke a word aloud. Sarah didn't hesitate. "Yes, I'm ready," she said firmly. Zarn studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. She couldn't tell if he was pleased or just curious, but his eyes seemed to soften ever so slightly. He nodded, as though he had been expecting this decision all along. "You understand the risks, Sarah?" he asked, his voice serious now. "There is no going back once we begin. Once you start this journey with me, everything will change. It may not always be easy, and the challenges ahead will be unlike anything you faced." Sarah took a deep breath. "I understand," she said, her voice unwavering. "But staying here, living the way I've been living, it's not enough. I need something more. I need to change my life." Zarn's gaze shifted to the small, glowing object beside him. "This is more than just about your life," he said softly. "This is about something much larger. But if you are willing to take the first step, then I will guide you. Together, we will find what I need. And in return, you will receive what you desire." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Sarah felt the weight of the decision settle on her shoulders. There was no going back now. She had already made up her mind. Zarn extended his hand toward her, his fingers glowing faintly. "Then let us begin." She took a deep breath and stepped forward, taking his hand. The moment their hands met, Sarah felt a surge of energy, like a current of power running through her veins. It wasn't painful, but it was intense, more intense than anything she had ever experienced. Her body hummed with the unfamiliar energy, and for a moment, she felt like she might lose control. But she held on. She had made her choice. As the light around them intensified, Sarah felt the world around her shift. The alley seemed to fade, replaced by a strange, shifting landscape, colors and shapes swirling around her, the world turning in ways she couldn't understand. It was a disorienting feeling, like she was being pulled in every direction at once, but Zarn's presence remained steady beside her. She could feel him guiding her, holding her steady as they traveled through the unknown. In that moment, Sarah realized that this was just the beginning. The risks she had chosen to take were about to reveal a journey that would test her in ways she couldn't even imagine. And though fear still lingered in the back of her mind, one thing was clear: there was no turning back now. A strange journey. The moment Sarah took Zarn's hand, the world around her seemed to vanish, replaced by a strange, swirling light. It was unlike anything she had ever experienced. Colors bowled into one another in ways that didn't make sense, shapes bent and twisted, and the air around her seemed to hum with energy. For a brief moment, she felt like she was floating, weightless, as if gravity had forgotten about her. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the swirling light faded. The world solidified around her once more, but it wasn't the world she had known. It wasn't even the city she had left behind. The streets, the buildings, the familiar faces, none of them were here. Instead, she found herself standing on a vast, barren plain, the ground beneath her a strange gray-blue color, as if the very earth was an alien material. The sky above was an unsettling shade of purple, with distant stars twinkling in strange patterns that didn't align with anything she recognized. Zarn was still beside her, his glowing form now appearing even more vibrant against the strange backdrop. He looked calm, as though this were just another ordinary day for him, but Sarah couldn't shake the unease that settled in her stomach. Where were they? What had just happened? "This is not Earth," Zarn's voice said, as if he were answering her unspoken question. His tone was matter-of-fact, as though traveling to new worlds was just part of his routine. We have crossed into the outer reaches of space. This is a place outside of time, a space between dimensions. Where we are now, nothing is as it seems. Sarah looked around in disbelief. You're saying we're in space? Zarn nodded, his eyes glowing with a soft, reassuring light. Yes, but do not be afraid. You are safe here. Despite his words, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were far from safe. The landscape stretched on endlessly, without any sign of life, without any clear direction. It felt as if they were in the middle of nowhere, drifting in some forgotten corner of the universe. But before she could voice her concerns, Zarn began to walk. He moved with purpose, his steps sure and steady, as if he knew exactly where he was going. Sarah hesitated for a moment, glancing around at the eerie emptiness, before following him. Her legs felt heavy as she walked, and she struggled to keep up with his long strides. There was a weight to this place that seemed to slow her down, a pressure that pushed against her chest, making it hard to breathe. As they walked, the silence between them grew more pronounced. Sarah's mind raced with questions, but she didn't know where to start. She had thought that helping Zarn would be the key to escaping her dull, monotonous life. But now, in this strange place, everything felt more complicated. So, where exactly are we going? She finally asked, her voice sounding small against the vast emptiness. Zarn didn't stop walking. We are headed to a location of great importance, he said, his tone still calm, though there was something in his words that made Sarah uneasy. There is a place here, a temple, an artifact, that will guide us in finding what I seek. But to find it, we must first face the challenges of this world. The path is not easy. What kind of challenges? Sarah asked, her heart starting to race again. Zarn's eyes flickered toward her, his expression unreadable. The challenges of the mind, of trust, and of choice. Only those who can face themselves in the mirror will succeed here. Sarah didn't understand what he meant, but she could tell by the seriousness in his tone that whatever lay ahead wasn't going to be simple. She had hoped that helping Zarn would bring her closer to the life she had always dreamed of, but now she wasn't so sure. This wasn't just about finding some object or completing a mission. This was about something deeper, something personal, something that would test everything she believed about herself. As they continued on, the strange landscape began to shift. The ground beneath their feet morphed, rising into uneven peaks that seemed to glow with an eerie light. The sky above them darkened, and strange, distant sounds echoed in the air. It was as if they were moving through a place that was both familiar and foreign, a place that couldn't quite exist. At one point, Sarah stumbled, her foot catching on the uneven terrain. She reached out to steady herself, but as her hand brushed the surface of a nearby stone, a wave of strange energy pulsed through her. She gasped, her fingers tingling as if they had touched something alive. "What was that?" she asked, pulling her hand back, eyes wide with shock. Zarn didn't look at her, but he seemed to understand. "This is a world where everything has a consciousness, Sarah. The stones, the air, the land, it all reacts to your presence. You must learn to listen to it, or it will overwhelm you." Sarah swallowed hard. She had no idea what that meant, but she could feel the weight of his words pressing on her. Everything here was different. Nothing made sense, and yet it felt like it was all part of some grand design. She wasn't just in a new world, she was inside a living puzzle, one that she had no idea how to solve. They continued walking, the landscape changing with every step. The air grew colder, and the silence grew deeper, until it felt like they were the only two beings in the entire universe. Sarah had no idea where this journey would take her, but she knew one thing for certain. She had crossed a threshold, and there was no going back. This was just the beginning, and she was already starting to realize how much she still had to learn, how much of herself she still had to discover. And the challenges ahead, they weren't just physical. They were far more complicated than that. This journey, whatever it was about to push her to her limits in ways she could never have imagined. The truth behind the offer. The further Sarah and Zarn traveled, the more disorienting the world around them became. What had begun as a strange but serene journey had turned into something far more chaotic. The landscape shifted continuously, as if the very fabric of reality was being manipulated with every step they took. What had once been barren ground had transformed into a dense, twisting forest of towering crystal structures, their surfaces glowing with an otherworldly light. The air hummed with energy, and every so often, Sarah would catch flashes of movement out of the corner of her eye, shadowy figures that vanished the moment she tried to focus on them. Her mind raced as she followed Zarn through the shifting terrain. The alien walked with purpose, seemingly unfazed by the bizarre changes around them. Sarah, however, struggled to keep up. Her legs felt heavier with each step, as though the pressure of this strange world was weighing down on her. The air was thin, and it made breathing difficult. Each breath felt like it took more effort than the last. But it wasn't the physical discomfort that troubled her the most. It was the growing sense of unease that had settled in her gut. Something wasn't right. As they approached what seemed like the heart of the glowing crystal forest, Sarah noticed that the atmosphere had changed. There was a heaviness in the air, a tension that she couldn't explain. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Zarn came to a halt in front of a massive crystal structure, its surface reflecting an array of swirling colors. It looked almost like a temple, though unlike any temple Sarah had ever seen. The crystalline walls pulsed with energy, and the ground around it seemed to vibrate with an unnatural hum. "This is it," Zarn said, his voice resonating through Sarah's mind as he turned to face her. "This is where we begin to uncover the truth." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She had expected some sort of treasure or artifact, something physical, something she could touch. But this was different. The energy from the temple surrounded her, invading her senses in ways she couldn't describe. It was almost as if the temple itself was alive, and it was aware of her presence. What is this place?" she asked, her voice shaky. Zarn didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped forward and placed his hand against the surface of the crystal temple. The moment his fingers made contact, the air around them seemed to crackle, and a low, rumbling sound filled the space. The ground trembled beneath her feet, and for a moment, Sarah feared the whole structure would collapse. But it didn't. Instead, the temple responded. The glowing crystals shifted and rearranged, revealing the hidden door that had been concealed from view. It was unlike anything Sarah had ever seen, an intricate, glowing archway, lined with symbols and patterns that seemed to shift and change as she looked at them. "This is where the true journey begins," Zarn said, his voice now solemn. "Inside lies the key to what I need. But what you don't yet understand is that the journey we're on is not just about finding an object. It's about understanding the nature of trust, of choice, and of sacrifice." Sarah's confusion deepened. "What do you mean?" she asked, feeling more and more like she was losing control of the situation. Zarn turned to face her, his glowing eyes piercing her soul. "You see, Sarah, the offer I made you was not just a simple exchange. It was a test of your willingness to face the truth. You are not just here to help me find something. You are here because you are the key to something much larger, something that spans beyond what either of us understands." A rush of questions flooded Sarah's mind, but before she could voice any of them, Zarn continued, his voice now filled with a quiet urgency. "This world, this journey, it's not just about the physical. It's about the path you are meant to walk. You have been brought here for a reason, Sarah. The very core of your existence, of everything you have believed in, is about to be tested. Your desires, your dreams, your fears, everything will come to the surface. And in the end, you will have to choose. Choose who you truly are, what you are willing to sacrifice, and whether or not you are ready to accept the power that awaits you." Sarah's mind spun. She had never expected any of this. The offer, the promise of a new life. She had thought it was about gaining something tangible, something she could hold in her hands. But now, it seemed like it was much deeper, much more complicated than she had imagined. She wasn't just helping Zarn. She wasn't just going to walk away with some magical treasure. She was part of something bigger, something that would change the course of her life forever. The reality of it all began to hit her. She wasn't just a bystander in this alien mission. She was a participant. She had been chosen for something, something she didn't fully understand yet. And the truth was, she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. What would it mean to face herself? What would it mean to choose between the life she had always known and the one that Zarn was offering her? Zarn stepped closer, his expression softer now. You don't have to make a decision right away. But know this, the truth will come, and when it does, you will have to decide whether you are ready or not. The temple doors began to open slowly, revealing a dark passage beyond. The energy from within pulsed, drawing Sarah forward. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, the decision looming just ahead. There was no turning back now. As she stepped forward, Sarah couldn't help but wonder, was she ready to face the truth? Was she prepared to make the ultimate choice? The final test. The temple door creaked open, revealing a narrow passageway that seemed to stretch endlessly into darkness. The air inside was thick with the scent of ancient stone, and the walls hummed with an energy that Sarah could feel deep in her bones. There was something heavy about this place, something that both terrified and intrigued her. Zarn didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, his glowing form lighting the way. His presence was comforting, yet the weight of what he had said before pressed on Sarah's mind, like a weight she couldn't shake. The truth will come, and you will have to decide. What kind of truth was he talking about? Was it about her? About him? Or something far greater, something that transcended their own desires and fears? Sarah didn't know, but she felt that the answers were just beyond her reach, waiting in the darkness ahead. For a moment, she hesitated, standing at the threshold of the passage. The cool air seemed to close in around her, the walls narrowing as she took a step forward. It was as if the passage was alive, guiding her towards something unknown. A strange pull tugged at her, urging her to move forward, to discover the truth. Zarn turned to look at her, his eyes glowing brighter as he sensed her hesitation. Do not fear what lies ahead, Sarah. You are not alone in this. I will be here with you. With those words, the darkness ahead seemed less daunting. She took another step forward, then another, until she was walking side by side with him into the heart of the temple. As they ventured deeper, the air grew heavier, the walls closer, as though the very space around them was closing in. It felt as if the temple itself was alive, testing her resolve with every step. Suddenly, the passageway opened up into a vast chamber. At the center of the room stood a massive stone pedestal, its surface covered in ancient symbols that seemed to shift and change before her eyes. The entire room pulsed with energy, and the air hummed with an intensity that made Sarah's skin tingle. The pedestal was bathed in a soft, golden light, and atop it sat an object, a small, glowing orb. It was beautiful, otherworldly, its light pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. This is it, Zarn said, his voice reverberating through the chamber. The artifact I have been seeking. This is the key to everything. Sarah stepped forward, drawn to the orb. As she neared it, the ground beneath her feet seemed to tremble, and a low, resonant voice echoed through the room, reverberating against the walls. Who seeks the key? The voice intoned, its tone deep and ancient. It was not Zarn's voice. This was something else, something older, and it came from everywhere at once. Zarn stopped in his tracks. We seek the power of change, he said, his voice unwavering. But Sarah felt something shift in the air, a strange tension that she couldn't explain. Do you seek change for others, or for yourself? The voice asked, its words sending a chill through Sarah's spine. Do you understand the price of what you desire? Sarah froze, her heart pounding in her chest. This wasn't what she expected. This was no simple artifact. It was a test. The artifact, the key. It wasn't just about unlocking power or achieving her dreams. It was about something much deeper, something far more personal. The voice spoke again, and this time it seemed to be speaking directly to her. Sarah, you are the one who has chosen this path. But do you understand the cost of what lies ahead? Power, freedom, wealth, these are not gifts without consequence. Every choice you make here, every action, will shape your future and the futures of those around you. Sarah's mind raced. The weight of the decision was heavier than she had ever imagined. She had been seeking a way out of her ordinary life, a way to escape the struggle, the pain, and the hopelessness that had defined her existence. But now, as she stood before the orb, she realized that the path she had chosen was not just about her. It was about the ripples she would create, the consequences that would unfold from every decision she made. Am I ready for this? Sarah whispered to herself, the question hanging in the air. Zarn's voice cut through the tension, soft yet firm. You do not need to know everything right now. Trust in yourself, Sarah. The key will show you what you need to see. You must decide. Will you take it? Sarah stood there, staring at the orb. She could feel its power, its warmth, its pull. But the truth was clear. This wasn't just a physical object. It was a test of her soul, a choice that would define who she was and who she would become. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. The weight of the decision was crushing, but there was no turning back now. She had already crossed so many lines, stepped into a world she could never fully understand. But this was the moment that would define everything. I have to make my choice, she whispered, more to herself than to Zarn. When she opened her eyes, she reached out for the orb. The moment her fingers brushed its surface, a wave of energy surged through her, overwhelming her senses. The room seemed to spin, the symbols on the pedestal glowing brighter as the voice spoke again, this time with finality. Then the test begins. Everything around her erupted into a blinding light. The world shifted and twisted, and for the first time since this journey began, Sarah truly understood the weight of the choices before her. The final test had begun, and there was no turning back. The irresistible offer fulfilled. The blinding light faded, and for a moment, Sarah was lost in the silence. The hum of the ancient temple, the rush of energy, all of it seemed to disappear, leaving her in a void. She felt weightless, disconnected from everything. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the experience, of the choices she had just made. When the light finally dissipated, she found herself standing in the center of a vast, infinite space. It wasn't like the world she knew. It wasn't a place at all. It was as if she was floating in the middle of the universe, surrounded by stars that burned brighter than she had ever seen. The sky, the stars, the endless void. It was all strangely familiar, but alien at the same time. The sensation was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. You have made your choice. Zarn's voice came from behind her, his tone calm, almost reverent. The path ahead will no longer be the same. The key you sought is not an object. It is within you. You have unlocked the potential inside yourself, the power to shape the future. Sarah turned around, still processing what was happening. Zarn stood there, his form glowing, but somehow less distant than before. There was a warmth in his presence now, something human, something real. She felt connected to him in a way she couldn't explain. Is this it? She asked, her voice shaky but strong. Is this the offer you promised me? The power to change everything. Zarn's eyes softened. This is not the end of your journey. It is only the beginning. The power you have unlocked is the power to shape your life, to create the future you desire. But it comes with responsibility, Sarah. You must use it wisely. The words settled into her chest, heavy with meaning. She had thought this moment would feel like victory, like everything she had ever dreamed of had finally come true. But now, in this vast, empty space, she realized something profound. The power to change her life wasn't just about wealth or freedom. It wasn't about escaping the life she had known. It was about confronting her fears, her desires, her inner darkness. The truth had been simpler than she imagined. It wasn't about external forces or material rewards. It was about transformation. It was about the courage to face herself and make the decisions that would shape her future, no matter the cost. The power she had sought was not a gift. It was a challenge. Sarah felt a strange calm wash over her, as though she were finally seeing the full picture. The promise of change wasn't about avoiding hardship. It was about confronting it head-on and using it as a stepping stone for growth. It was the strength to build something better, not through shortcuts or magical solutions, but through her own resilience. "I understand now," she said softly, the words finally making sense. "It's not the life I imagined. It's the life I create." Zarn smiled, his expression reflecting something close to pride. "Yes, you are ready. The journey has shaped you, and now you have the power to shape the world around you." For a moment, there was silence between them, as Sarah took it all in. The vastness of space, the infinite potential that lay before her. It felt overwhelming, but also liberating. She could choose her path, not just for herself, but for those she cared about. She wasn't just a passive participant in life anymore. She was the architect of her own destiny. Zarn's form began to fade, his presence retreating into the other. But his voice lingered, resonating in Sarah's mind. "Remember, Sarah, the offer was not just about what you would gain, but what you would become. And now you must decide how to wield that power. Choose wisely, and you will change the world. Choose recklessly, and you will lose everything." The words echoed in her mind as the space around her began to shimmer. It was as though the universe itself was responding to her decision, reshaping itself in accordance with her newfound awareness. The vast emptiness around her slowly morphed into something more solid, more familiar. It wasn't Earth, not exactly. But it was a place she could shape, a place where she could rebuild, renew, and grow. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settle in her bones. She was ready for this. She was ready to take on the challenge of creating the life she had always dreamed of, but this time, with the knowledge that the true power lay within her all along. As she stood there, in the center of the universe, she realized that she was no longer the woman who had walked into that alley all those days ago. She was no longer just a waitress, struggling to survive. She was someone who could shape her own future, someone who could take the lessons from this journey and forge a new path, one filled with purpose, meaning, and the courage to face whatever came next. And with that, Sarah took her first step forward. The universe, infinite and full of possibilities, was now hers to shape.